Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Chinese President Xi Jinping says, let me quote right away, that right now there are changes the likes of which we haven't seen for 100 years, and we are the ones driving these changes together, unquote. It is what the Chinese president said to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who was bidding him farewell after China's president had two-day visit to Russia. Both the leaders had one-on-one more than 4.5 hours of talks in which both the leaders discussed a wide range of issues of mutual interest and bilateral cooperation. Now, Chinese president has hailed the bilateral relationship with Russia entering a new era. At the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that he is sure this bilateral relationship has unlimited prospects and possibilities. Now, after the meeting, in a joint statement, both the leaders have urged Washington to stop undermining regional and international security, at the same time expressing concern about NATO's expansion in Asia Pacific region also. Now, Chinese president has once again reiterated China's neutral position regarding the Ukraine conflict, with Russian President Vladimir Putin saying that many parts of the 12-point peace proposal, which was already released by China, could be made the basis for the peaceful settlement of the Ukraine conflict. Yet he says at the same time that the West and Kyiv doesn't seem ready for it. We have seen a response coming from the White House, which has said that China doesn't have the impartial position, at the same time urging China to pressure Russia to withdraw from Ukraine to end the war. We have seen certain other developments, the supply of tanks from the US and as well as the shells with depleted uranium by the UK, which have made a new controversy, and Russian president has strongly reacted to that. Now we'll be discussing about all these aspects and the current level of relationship between Russia and China, and the kind of response that the White House gave regarding this meeting. Let me bring in our panelists. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Brigadier Retired Mohammad Zeeshan. He is Director General, Center for Peace, Security and Developmental Studies. Brigadier Zeeshan, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate your precious time. And we are also honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Naazir Mahmood. He is Senior Journalist. Dr. Naazir, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Brigadier Zeeshan. Now, the current level of bilateral relationship between Russia and China, where do you see that standing right now at this point in history?
Thank you, Jawad. Right now, China and Russia are in a very high point of their relationship, as Chinese have highlighted that this is a no limit partnership. This is one. Secondly, as we can all observe, that there is an evolving world order, and China and Russia are very obvious strategic partners in that. Chinese and Russians are also having good trade relations, but at this particular point, when Russians are involved in a conflict, military conflict of Ukraine, everything is not good about Russian economy also, and they desperately need Chinese at this point in time. So here I think the bigger partner is China, and the Russians are expecting a lot of support, which China has provided to Russians. But there is one point where one has to consider that Chinese have not taken complete side of Russia in the Ukraine conflict. So they have kept it on the sidelines, the conflict, and they are trying to be neutral. They are also trying to be peacemakers, and we should also consider that Russians will have to accept some clause or some aspects of some actions which Chinese may be recommending it to them. So the relation is at a high point, but the peacemaking aspect on Ukraine conflict will have certain bitter pills for Russia.
Right. Dr. Naazir, what's your take regarding as Chinese President Xi Jinping has hailed this bilateral relationship at this point in history, entering a new era, isn't it? Because the kind of engagements we have seen, especially in the recent past between the two.
I think this is a very important development, though calling it the single biggest event in the past 100 years is sounds a bit hyperbole, because we have seen changing sides and power of balance shifting in 1970s also. In 1970s, America wanted a breakthrough with China. With Pakistan's help, American and Chinese relationship stabilized at that, and at that time also it was a big, power shift on the international arena. So it is a big event, though I have reservation and calling it a very, very big event. It is a big event.
Dr. Naazir, perhaps the Chinese president hasn't specifically mentioned this particular event, this bilateral meeting between Russian president, he himself also. He has talked about the recent changes which are happening globally.
Well, recent changes, as Brigadier Saab also mentioned, China has been very circumspect and careful also in its position. Overall, it has tried to keep a neutral position, but it has not condemned Russian aggression, because there is no doubt that Russia is an aggressor in this situation. On an individual level, it should be condemned, but on an international level, countries have their own priorities and their preferences. So apart from G7 countries and some other close allies of the US, not many countries have condemned it. India has not condemned it, Pakistan has not condemned it, China has not condemned it. Why? Because these countries have their own interest, including Pakistan, which is all right. I mean, countries have to take their own interest into account. So, one aspect of this is, this has two sides of it, Chinese and Russian relations. It has a military aspect of it and it has an economic aspect of it. The military aspect is that America has also pushed China in that direction. If we recall quite recently, the AUKUS treaty that they have signed, Australia, UK and US. Now, this is quite recent. And they have concluded a deal with Australia, providing Australia nuclear submarines, which is a major concern for China. Now, then Japanese Prime Minister's visit to Kiev. So ideally, Japan and China should have good relationship, and China and Australia also should have good relationship. But America, in a way, is trying to contain China from both sides, from the Australian side and from Japanese side. So China itself feels a bit threatened. So that's why China is inclined towards Russia, and Russia itself is threatened by NATO's expansion. So though they have not called it a military alliance, China and Russia, they have been careful. In the final statement, they have not called it an alliance. They said it's not alliance, it is not aimed at anyone else, but we are simply trying to consolidate our own relationship. So relationship will be, economically speaking, now China and Russia both are dependent on each other. Their bilateral trade has crossed $200 billion, $120 billion from Chinese side and around $80 billion from Russian side, which is a major figure. So, and China has benefited also. So after invasion of Ukraine, two countries that have benefited the most are China and India, because both these countries are buying cheap oil and gas from Russia, which is benefiting their economies. And then China is also talking about, and Russia is also talking about, a new pipeline through Mongolia, which they are calling Power of Siberia 2, because one pipeline is already existing, which supplies China. But now they are planning to have another pipeline. So what that means that this visit was very important, and the agreements that they have concluded, mostly economic, they are going a long way, and I don't see any dent in this mutual cooperation in the near future. So I think this will be a long lasting cooperation between Russia and China versus US and G7.
Right. Brigadier Zeeshan, when we talk about the 12-point peace proposal which was released earlier by China, now you already mentioned that one, also making China's position as a peace broker or a peacemaker. When Russian President Vladimir Putin says there are many paths which could be made the basis for the peaceful settlement of the Ukraine conflict, isn't it a big success and an achievement for a Chinese leadership with this particular peace proposal?
To start with, yes, you are right. It is a big success. But if you allow me, let's zoom out a little bit from Ukraine. And if we look at the global strategic construct, in past 20 years or more than that, or specifically if we see after 9/11, United States has earned its reputation as creating security situations in order to sustain its defense industry. This, I'm not saying that this is the correct perception or the only perception, but this is the perception globally. Now, what it means, what it entails, even the strategic partners of US in various parts of the world are a little concerned about the way United States has initiated or has been managing the global strategic order. What China has done, last year Chinese came up with the concept of global security initiative. Now that GSI, commonly known as, that GSI is not based on military aspects. It is not based on creating conflicts or resolving conflicts through military means. Chinese, as we all know, have concentrated their diplomacy based on their economic power and their trading potential and the investment they can provide to various countries and the regions. So they certainly have used that potential in becoming peacemaker in the world. US will certainly not agree to what China is doing in Middle East. We may come on that Middle East aspect, Saudi-Iran agreement or initiative subsequently. But similarly in Europe, the Ukraine conflict, the Chinese initiative has been welcomed by even European powers, but they are not very much, they are not right now very, what I should say, very encouraging about it. One. Two, the prospects of it are yet to be seen, that how it is going to unfold, because the 12-point agenda, as you have highlighted, that Vladimir Putin has said that some of its parts can become the basis of a start. Kiev, the Ukrainian government, they had the position that we cannot have any peace talks unless Russia withdraws from all parts of Ukraine which it has annexed or it has occupied today. But what is the catch here? The catch is that even Ukraine has a lot of economic stakes with China, or they will certainly have a lot of economic interest with China. So it is generally commented upon that Ukraine will have to come up with a stance not as aggressive or as hardline as they have in order to give space to this Chinese initiative. It has to be seen how US reacts. It has to be seen how EU reacts. So I think this is a major deal which China has done in the overall global strategic construct. And if at all it has a little bit of success, it is going to give a lot of credence to the global power potential of China.
Right, Dr. Naazir, we had earlier seen, as Brigadier Zeeshan has also mentioned, the number of European countries which actually welcomed this particular step by China of the 12-point peace proposal regarding the Ukraine conflict. We also saw Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also expressing the desire to go and visit Beijing and have talks with President Xi Jinping. So that clearly shows that the confidence at that trust level among the global leadership is increasing day by day when it comes to the Chinese leadership as a peace broker or a peacemaker.
Well, China has been playing a positive role between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Also, it played a positive role, and it can definitely play a positive role between Ukraine and Russia also. But this 12-point statement that was issued, I think it also falls short on a couple of points. What it talks about respecting sovereignty of all countries. That is the first point. Well, who could disagree with this? And who violated the sovereignty? It was Russia who violated the sovereignty of Ukraine. Then the next point, the 12-point statement also talks about non-interference in other countries, for example. But it does not talk about immediate withdrawal of occupying forces. That is the point, which is true, that around 20% of Ukrainian territory is under Russian occupation at the moment. So unless a statement talks about that.
So it also talks about the ceasefire. So what's wrong about having a ceasefire?
Well, then there should be ceasefire.
Then gradual de-escalation of the situation also. It talks about that also.
Yes, again, but this de-escalation and ceasefire should come from the aggressor. In this particular case, Ukraine has not hit a single inch of Russian territory. 20% of Ukrainian territory is under Russian control, and Russia is the one which is repeatedly targeting. Just we saw on PTV that even today they have been targeting even civilian population. So unless any statement does not talk about that, it's like, for example, between Palestine and Israel, you talk about, and you don't talk about Israeli atrocities.
So what about this statement by Russian President Vladimir Putin when he says there are many parts of this 12-point peace proposal by China which could be made the basis for the peaceful settlement of the Ukraine conflict, yet the West and Kyiv doesn't seem ready for it? What does that mean?
I think this is simply wordplay. Because as I say that I consider Russia as an aggressor, and if it is aggressor, and if it is either or we say that it's not an aggressor, or we just refuse that Russia is not occupying 20% of Ukrainian territory, or Russia is not hitting. Russia is doing all that, and after doing all that, this is just from Vladimir Putin's side, this is just a very nice wordplay that this can be a very good beginning. Well, first of all, please stop aggression, withdraw your forces. If you don't do this and then you talk about peace, this is, I think this is just a wordplay.
Yeah, it was a special military operation to end that persecution of the people of Russian descent in certain parts of Ukraine. That's what the justification was given.
Well, 10 years back, almost 10 years back in 2014, Russia occupied Crimea. And that was also on the same basis, though there was no fighting going on, but they said that the majority is Russian speaking, so we are occupying it. So Russia could have stopped there. But then they started interfering in other countries. So if, on the basis of a certain language being spoken, in Iran there are Baloch people across the border. Can Pakistan say that,
So what about the expansion of NATO? There has been an alarm that has been expressed by both Russia and China also about the expansion of NATO, particularly when there is an understanding between the US and the West and Russia about the expansion of NATO. But what about giving the states which have the common border with Russia a membership of NATO?
Well, NATO, when NATO was formed in 1949, its membership was just 12. Now its membership is around 29. And most of these countries, around 18 countries, joined after the collapse of the Soviet Union, one after another. So, and then just feeling threatened by Ukraine, if had joined, what has Russia done? Russia has pushed even those neutral countries like Finland and Sweden to the arms of NATO. So it has in fact backfired. So just using, I think Russia was just, let me conclude by just saying that why I think that Putin has been in power for almost 25 years now. He came to power in 99. His internal popularity was increasingly going down. he needed an excuse to incite nationalism in the country. So I see Putin's nationalism behind this aggression. So, essentially, I don't think that, we can condone Russia's aggression by blaming NATO. NATO could be blamed. I mean, I can condemn America for invading Iraq. Of course, we should. America invaded Afghanistan. We condemn that. So similarly, any aggressor, be it America, be it Russia, when they are aggressor, when they attack other countries, they need to be condemned.
Right, that's why exactly there in the joint statement, the thing about double standards also been said regarding that. I'll come to you after taking Brigadier Zeeshan's point of view on this. When Russian president talks about these points, some parts of it to be made the basis for the peaceful settlement, but at the same time he says Kyiv and the West doesn't seem to be ready for that. And we have seen a couple of provocative actions happening also. The rapid supply of Abrams tanks by the US to Ukraine, as well as the shells with depleted uranium by the UK, which has got a very stern reaction from the President Putin himself also.
If we look at the 12 points academically, they are basically an outcome of the UN Charter, where United Nations give guarantees to sovereign states, and where the world order has been defined in UN Charter, that nobody is going to interfere in anybody's internal affairs, and the borders are, sovereign, and one has to respect that.
Please, Brigadier Zeeshan, please hold your thought. I'll come back to you and we'll resume the discussion from here. We'll have to go for a quick break, and after that we'll resume the discussion from here. For that, stay tuned. Welcome back to Views on News. We are discussing the current level of relationship between China and Russia, and as there was an important meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping. We are joined in the studio by Brigadier Retired Mohammad Zeeshan and Dr. Naazir Mahmood. Brigadier Zeeshan, before going on the break, we were talking about the statement that came from a Russian president saying that the Western Kyiv doesn't is ready for the peaceful settlement of the Ukraine conflict. Your take?
As I started before we went for the break, that this 12-point peace initiative which China has floated, it is basically an outcome of what has been written in the UN Charter. Now, the discussion will not be time-bound. When you're talking of sovereignty, when you're talking about interference of foreign powers into a country, it will go back to some 20 years, where United States or the Western powers started influencing the politics in Ukraine. 2007-8, 2014, need not to go into those details, but lot of interference happened and lot of changes happened within Ukraine. Russian and Chinese, basically they will be pressing upon this point that this is not a naked aggression. In 1991, after the dissolution of Soviet Union, it was an undertaking by the Western powers, specifically United States, that NATO will not expand eastwards and the near frontiers of Russia will not be threatened. But that undertaking was never, respected by the Western powers and United States. The situation has arrived that most of the strategic academics within United States also, or I don't say most, but some of them, they agree that Russia had no option but to ensure that NATO does not come to its doorstep in Ukraine. If we see the map, where is Ukraine and where is Moscow? So we will certainly know why Russia was so sensitive about NATO coming into Ukraine. Now, this 12 point is trying to, this is going to be very challenging for both EU and United States, that how they are going to handle this latest peace initiative about Ukraine conflict. European powers are interested in resolution of this conflict, but at the same time they have to side with United States. United States obviously will not accept it, but United States has been challenged in a global conflict scenario of Europe of a lot of significance, which is going to impact how the world is going to be in 21st century. So the solution or the conclusion of this conflict will certainly be of a lot of importance. So what China has done, China has been very skillful in its politics, and Russia may not find itself in a total beneficial position out of this Ukraine conflict. Russia will also have to, as I said earlier, they will have to swallow some bitter pills, but at the same time the Ukrainian leadership and European leadership, it is to be seen how they react to this Chinese initiative. Certainly it has put United States in a difficult position.
Right. Dr. Naazir, as Brigadier Zeeshan has very comprehensively in detail has shed light how there was an understanding between the US and Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union that there wouldn't be any eastward expansion of the NATO, yet it was violated. Your take, you were already shedding light on it.
Yes.
If you want to add something more to it.
That's very right. Ideally, when Warsaw, at that time during the Cold War, there were two competing alliances, Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union, and NATO led by the US. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, automatically Warsaw Pact dissolved. So at that time, ideally NATO should have been dissolved, but that did not happen. Rather, what happened, most of the Eastern European countries which were under practical occupation of the Soviet Union, they had bitter memories of Moscow control. So most of these countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, even those three states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which were part of the Soviet Union, all of them had bitter memories of the Soviet period. They applied, nobody takes a country without application. So these were the countries that kept applying because they were afraid that one day Russia may attack them, and which has proved correct right now. So these countries mostly they joined in the 1990s. Mind you, in 1990s, Boris Yeltsin was the president of Russia, and at that time, ideally Russia should have protested at that time. Russia should have made it an issue at that time. They did not make it an issue at that time. They just kept quiet, and NATO kept expanding. And even Putin, during the first 10 years of his rule from 2000 to 2010, there was no major issue against NATO expansion. But suddenly, after all these countries became member, and they are also not very far. Look at Estonia and all. Saying that Ukraine is too close. So close are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So, just by adding one more country, probably it would not have much of a difference. That is what my point. Ideally, NATO should have been dissolved. But most of these countries, they joined voluntarily, they applied because there is not even a single Eastern European country which was previously under Soviet influence, which has good memories of the Soviet time and which would say that no, apart from Belarusia. And Belarusia is also ruled by dictator Lukashenko, and who has been ruling for almost 30 years now. So apart from Belarusia, all other countries, and I am sure when there is change in Belarusia would also go against, because those memories are hard, and then this aggression has created new memories and new threats. So as I said, that even those countries which kept themselves neutral, like Finland and Sweden, they have also been pushed, and Russia cannot do it. Russia cannot stop these countries now from joining. Any country has its own interest. For example, Pakistan in 1950s joined SEATO and CENTO because state of Pakistan has had its own consideration. Now, at that time, Could India object to Pakistan's joining those? India had no business. I mean, whether it was right or wrong, as an individual, I could have opposed my government.
So, Dr. Naazir, when we talk about the supply of weapons, the US has most recently accused China of contemplating to provide the lethal assistance to Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine conflict. Now, there are certain developments. They have already in January announced the supply of Abraham tanks. Now, they've opted to send in the refurbished tanks to Ukraine. We have also seen the talk happening of the nuclear threat, between the threat of nuclear weapon use between Russia and the West vis-a-vis Ukraine conflict. Now, the supply of the shells with depleted uranium by the UK to Ukraine, isn't it a clear-cut provocation? What about this particular behavior from the West also?
Well, there are 2 points there. Number one, America has its own nefarious, I would say, evil interests in promoting violence around the world, be it invasion of Afghanistan, invasion of Iraq. America has invaded so many countries, one can't even remember. China has not invaded any country. Russia also did not invade after Afghanistan. The next mistake that Russia has made is now. So America is more responsible, and that's what America does. Just, American lobby, military industrial complex, they want to have that, war machinery going. So America has to, blame for all this to a great extent. But at the same time, we cannot absolve Russia also. So one aspect is that, of course, this war machinery should stop. This, the production and sale of arms, we should oppose that. But if the other point, second point that I am making, after condemning America and weapon supply, our condemnation should not stop there. If a country is invaded, a poor small country like Ukraine, it has a right to look for weapons. What would it do? I mean, what do we suggest to Zelensky or Kiev? Surrender and accept Russian aggression? I wouldn't do that. I mean, if you apply to any other country, including our country, what options do we have? When a country is invaded, attacked, that country has a right to look for weapons. So while I am condemning American war machinery, Ukraine has a right to look for weapons.
Let me take Brigadier Zeeshan's point on this one also.
Sure.
The right of having weapons if you're invaded, just the way Ukraine has been.
If I rephrase and take out the right rather than necessity, when you are in a conflict, it is necessary to have a good supply of arms and ammunition. And when we talk of arms and ammunition, there is a level of escalation which has to be kept in mind. Although there are a lot of blame on Russia that it has targeted civilian population, but in Ukraine, all the major cities have uninterrupted power supply. The heating is on, their public transport is on, their telecommunication is on, so their hospitals are working. Russians have not gone beyond a certain level in use of force. They have been, if I may say, little careful in maintaining an escalatory ladder and not going beyond reasonable use of force in achieving their military objectives. At the same time, Ukraine, in order to fight against the Russian military might, they could not have done on their own, so they needed support. Now, when you start talking about that they have the right to attain, it's not about right. Now the conflict is on. When the conflict or the military war is on, then it is the necessity which decides. And in my opinion, Chinese are not going to supply or provide lethal military munitions to Russia. Russia certainly has sufficient military might.
Brigadier Zeeshan, it makes me curious to understand when Russian President Vladimir Putin says that Russia could meet the energy demands of the growing energy demand of China. At the same time, it is ready to provide meat as well as grain to China. So what exactly China gets out in return?
Number one, the diplomatic support what Russia
Or
is
what
getting.
Russia gets out in
After
return.
United States, China is the biggest power of the globe. And China is, if it is not condemning, it is the biggest support Russia can get in this scenario. Let's look at the emerging world orders, the context of emerging world order. The world order, what it was being perceived in 21st century, the first decade of 21st century, it was perceived as the dominant US and regional powers in various parts of the world. And this is going to be the world order for the 21st century. But now at the end of the second decade, Chinese have challenged that concept. Now the world has to be, shared by US will have to share its global influence with China. This is actually the issue. Rest is all the things which are happening in Middle East or in Europe or in Western Pacific, the South China Sea, they are symptoms. Actually, it is how United States is going to share the global political, strategic and economic power with China. This is the question.
So when when we talk about the energy cooperation between Russia and China, now since there are sanctions and there has been a lot of talk about the Russian energy supply to Europe, the major European countries depend largely on the Russian energy supplies. So after the kind of relationship, the escalation between the US and Russia that had been going on vis-a-vis Ukraine conflict, and then there had been reports of power outages in major European capitals also. Now it clearly shows there are alternative avenues for Russian gas supply, and that comes with such a giant market that we call China. So isn't it a huge setback for Europeans themselves? So shouldn't they be making US realize that it is going to be detrimental for themselves in the longer run also?
Absolutely, you are right. Because when we went into this conflict, United States led and Europe was involved in it. The perception was that when the Europeans are going to enforce sanctions, energy sanctions on Russia, Russian economy will collapse and it will be unsustainable for Russia to wage war in Ukraine. That has not happened. Rather, the energy revenues in Russia have grown beyond the level when it was providing energy to Europe because of China and India. So this is something which has happened for the first time in past 50 years, and United States and European powers are really in a fix.
So the sanctions haven't worked.
Sanctions haven't worked. Sanctions cannot work. And as you asked previously, that what is going to be the Russian benefit in US, China, Russia energy deals, China is going to provide the sustenance to Russian economy, what Russia was may not have got after those sanctions. So those sanctions have not worked at all.
So biggest setback for that design of the West?
As it has been generally said, that Ukraine has been thrown under the bus and Europe is in a fix.
Dr. Naazir, your take regarding this?
Yes, as I said, who's benefiting? If we, conclude this discussion, I'll also talk about Pakistan, what Pakistan's role should be. But let's continue where he left. America has benefited, China has benefited, India has benefited, but Europe has lost. Ukraine is devastated, destroyed, almost destroyed. Now, what about Pakistan? I think Pakistan should learn from China and India. And this is the time when we should have a deal. We should expedite our negotiation with Russia to get their cheap. If China and India can get that cheap oil, why can't we get it? And then same applies to Iran. Iran constructed its pipeline till Pakistan's border, and our side is lying vacant. We have not fulfilled the commitment, and if we don't do this, we will end up paying huge damages also. So I think Pakistan should now revisit its own foreign policy, normalize relationship, improve relationship with Iran, complete the pipeline to get fuel from there, and similarly open or expedite the negotiation with Russia to get more fuel. I think that should be Pakistan's position.
Right, Brigadier Zeeshan, now there are reports that the UK is planning to supply tanks and also the shells with depleted uranium. Now, Russian Defense Minister has said that it is another step which will make the West and the Russian side ever closer to a nuclear collision. So during this Ukraine conflict, we have repeatedly heard about the threat of use of nuclear weapons. So if this is another step that is bringing both the sides closer to nuclear collision, ideally such type of ammunition shouldn't be supplied.
First of all, about the tanks. The tanks are not like high-tech fighter aircrafts. The tanks work in numbers. Those numbers, if they are in hundreds, then they are useful. Supplying 40, 50, 100, 120 tanks to Ukraine is of no value. It may be discussed internationally. It may become one factor in the Russian condemnation of involvement by UK and US in Ukraine conflict. But it will not have any meaningful impact on the military operations in Ukraine. I am pretty much, I doubt that UK can provide 200 or 400 tanks to Ukraine.
So that's going to make a considerable difference on the battlefield?
If it is in that quantum, yes, it will. But if it is, within 100, then it is of no value. Now coming to the ammunition, tank ammunition. A tank ammunition which is used against tanks, it is known as kinetic energy projectile. That kinetic energy projectile is an arrow kind of hard tungsten carbide arrow. It is coated with depleted uranium. That depleted uranium, when it hits the steel of the tank of your enemy, creates certain radioactivity. This shouldn't have been used, or this shouldn't have been come as an option. We know Britishers are pretty intelligent diplomats and politicians. So there has to be some background to it. Russians will certainly oppose it, the whole world will oppose it. But why UK has done it, it is yet to be seen. Is it kind of a brinkmanship within the use of military instrument, or it is trying to preempt against high-tech military hardware coming from China to Russia?
So how do you expect, very quickly, a short take on this, how do you expect the Russians to react to this? Because President Vladimir Putin has said the United Kingdom announced not only the supply of tanks to Ukraine, but also shells with depleted uranium. If this happens, Russia will be forced to react. What sort of reaction could be expected?
Russia will also deploy similar type of ammunition and similar type of weaponry in the conflict. And this is going to raise concerns in European Union. This is going to, as I said, that it may be a preemption to stop high-tech military supplies from China to Russia.
Right. Brigadier Retired Mohammad Zeeshan, Director General, Center for Peace, Security and Developmental Studies, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. And Dr. Naazir Mahmood, Senior Journalist, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next episode, take good care of yourselves.